Also, nowadays, much is made about our environment and our human interaction within it, with carbon emissions, climate change, change in weather patterns, jet streams, warming of the oceans, pollution, plastics in our oceans and other waterways. Um, the modern environmental movement is very big, and there's a genuine concern. A lot of critics say that it's maybe just an opportunity for people to cash in on economic change and they want to redistribute income, this, that, or the other. I don't know about any of that. I do know that with China and India industrializing the way that they are, they're emitting massive amounts of carbon emissions into the air on a daily basis. That's in combination with post industrialized countries like the United States. The United States emits a gigantic amount of carbon into our atmosphere. That's unquestionable. Our efforts are at least putting us on the downward trend. We've actually decreased a few percentage points in recent years. While it's still not good, it's at least headed in a better direction. I'll take that temporarily. China and India, it's almost indiscriminate. Nobody wants to tell China to stop burning stuff and releasing it into the air, but whatever. Um, what's concerning about environmentalism is that sometimes the activism that comes with it seems almost counterproductive. But one thing is readily clear is that with 7 billion people on this planet, it's exceptionally hard for them not to have some sort of negative effect on our climate, on our environment, or otherwise. We're making some sort of impact negatively. Now, to the extent that's where scientists debate. But the point is clear, something's happening. In the coronavirus pandemic quarantine lockdown era, you see many different publications talking about how the air over Los Angeles has largely cleaned itself. The waterways in Venice, Italy, are clear. They've been this murky green color, now they're clear. Um, you see all kinds of different things that are clearing up. The air over Beijing is significantly cleaner than it was just a few months ago. Okay? So humans are having some sort of an impact. But going back a few chapters when we talked about Teddy Roosevelt and his conservationist ideas, as opposed to John Muir and his preservationist ideas, you see an extension of that coming out and about in the late 1960s and early 1970s. People are recognizing that we're having a detrimental effect on environment. Um, Not just the air, but really more around that time, the concern was more largely centered around various different aspects of pollution. Things were so bad in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1969 that the Cuyahoga River, that runs right through Cleveland into one of the Great Lakes, um, the river had so much petroleum byproduct in it that it would often catch fire. Think about that for a second. A river would catch on fire. Rivers are made of water. Water puts out fire. So if a river is on fire, then that's not water. You have all kinds of high concentrations of contaminants like petroleum byproduct or whatnot that have been dumped into that river to where it could ignite on fire. So, from that perspective, that really just amplifies the movement and idea of improving ecology, the science of our environment, and what we can do to promote more environmental advocacy so as to not have rivers and other waterways polluted to where they catch on fire anymore. We can do better than this. And so you have various different organizations, the Wilderness Society, the Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, various different national parks movements, who espouse the idea of a stronger ecological presence so as to be better stewards of our environment. So we're not catching rivers on fire. And so through these movements, you have environmental activists that want to influence government to have more clean air projects, to have less water pollution. What can we do to improve ecological concepts without destroying our economy? That's also a valid question. Can we implement some of these aspects of the Paris climate change movement without having a severe detrimental effect on our economy? Okay, that's a valid question. There has to be some sort of balance issue, raising environmental awareness issues while not destroying economic productivity. There has to be a balance between those two. So within the environmental movement itself, in the late 60s and early 1970s, you see the advent of Earth Day, April 1970, that would take an annual approach to espouse the idea of raising awareness, of teaching society about being better stewards of our environment. Okay, and they would do so by unaligning themselves with radical leftists. They wanted to take more of a mainstream centrist type approach because oftentimes people are put off by hyper messages. When you are hyper extreme, oftentimes you completely turn off the people who need to hear your message the most. So if you take more of a centrist approach, a more calmed and more informative approach without sounding the alarm, you're more likely to reach people and get them actually thinking. So the Earth Day movement took on this approach, and it would eventually have a larger than life type aspect that would combine with anti-war sentiment, pro-civil rights sentiment, that can help espouse change, especially in and around preserving our environment and where we live. Okay, so nowadays, you see the National Environmental Protection Act, which established the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, in 1970, signed by President Nixon, to do just that, to oversee and enforce anti-pollution standards. You're going to establish the Clean Water Act. You're going to develop different things to improve environmental destruction. Okay, so you're going to have more anti-pollution standards for businesses and consumers. Okay, you're going to have things like a catalytic converter installed in your cars that's going to harness the carbon coming from the engine and keep it from being released into the atmosphere. You're going to have other different things that are going to see a change. You're not going to have a wholesale dumping of toxic waste and other contaminants into fresh water. Nowadays, the river in Cleveland is significantly cleaner than it was 50 years ago. It's not catching on fire anymore. But point of the matter is, the idea of having a broad national ideal comes to a forefront now, okay, as part of a greater societal improvement, if you will. So, the modern environmental movement is rooted from activity 50 years ago, and really beyond that, but really spearheaded by the results of what happened 50 years ago, especially in and around the first Earth Day. Okay, so nowadays, environmental concerns extend beyond polluting rivers and lakes and whatnot. You know, large oil spills that have taken place. The BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in the spring of 2010 comes to mind. The Valdez oil spill off the Alaskan coast 30 years ago in 1989. All those are big issues. But then also nowadays it's been extended to the amount of plastics, the amount of trash that is just arbitrarily dumped into the ocean. There are large swaths of just plastics and other trash in our nation's, in our country, in our world's oceans. Okay? Um, it chokes off sunlight going into the water. It chokes off oxygen content and thereby damaging living conditions for the marine wildlife that live in those areas. That's a massive problem. Also, many scientists may not agree on the exact extent, but most scientists agree that emitting carbon into our environment is going to have some sort of warming effect, or in the very least, some sort of climatological change effect. If it doesn't raise the temperature of the Earth's core atmosphere temperature, it might change the dynamic of how the cycles go, which is going to have a damaging effect over the long term. Okay, so in the next 10 years, I'd be very surprised if you didn't see a drastic number of increase in the number of electric cars on the highways. There will still be combustible engines. You'll still have gasoline engines and diesel engines. You're just going to see a lot more electric engines. Okay? Oil and gas isn't going away. Oil and gas provide more than just cars, gasoline fuel for combustion engines. A lot of your plastics, a lot of your everyday materials are made from petroleum products. So that's not going away. But maybe reducing our need for it, making us less thirsty for it, could have a positive effect for environmental concern. Otherwise, though, with the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the EPA, all of those aspects were designed by people who had environmental goals, who wanted to have good reason to improve environmental conditions out of a concern, a genuine concern for the world in which we live. Okay? So you get your roots around this time.